What's going on, folks? Look, I'm going to talk about Jermaine Jackson in this lawsuit that he's facing right now regarding a sexual assault case filed by this woman named Rita Barrett, stating that he did something to her back in 1988. And that's why we got to look at the actual politics behind it, because this ain't just celebrity gossip. It's about this law that California passed called the Sexual Abuse and Cover Up Accountability Act. And politicians created this law to temporarily pause the statutes of limitations and allowing these old reopened cases in court. Now, they talk about this in Capitol buildings like it's all about justice. But you know how we do it here on Big Brother's Perspective. We got to ask the real question. When the government opens up a temporary 1 year window to sue and then slams the door shut, who's really winning here? Was this law actually created to find the truth? Or did the politicians just invite a loophole for these women to go after a multi-million-dollar payday? But this situation with Jermaine hasn't really been talked about that much. There's been some commentary on it, but not much, probably because it's Jermaine and not Michael instead. But Jermaine was probably the very first Jackson brother that I ever really became familiar with, because back in the 90s, Michael and Janet were already dominating the charts. You know, they were global icons, and the rest of the siblings, they weren't quite as successful as Mike and Janet was, but they were still well known. They were still household names. But as I got older and actually started studying their individual careers, I realized just how talented they all were, especially Jermaine. Because when you go back and listen to the early Jackson 5 music where he and Mike was sharing the lead vocals, or when you look at his solo hits throughout the 70s and 80s, the man had some good songs. He had some hits. And there are actually some songs I do like from Jermaine, like his ballad slow jams like Daddy's Home, Don't Take It Personal, Do What You Do, I Am Love, which he did with Mike. And I mean, those songs were good, but when you compare him to Michael, Jermaine was just a normal, traditional soul singer, while Mike was more of a rare, otherworldly superstar who captivated the whole entire planet. So when you know the history, it's pretty easy to see why Jermaine's music got overshadowed. And honestly, he was always a little bitter about it, because we could see this friction happening in real time, because right when Mike was ruling the world with Thriller, Jermaine put out his Dynamite video to where he's literally in a prison being surrounded by a crew of dancers playing inmates. And look, it wasn't a bad video, but it is dated and it feels kind of ridiculous when you realize what he was actually trying to do. Because it was plain and obvious and clear as day that he was trying to copy Michael's formula just to prove to the world that he could deliver his own Beat It or Thriller moment. And he even went out and hired the exact same director Mike used for his video, Bob Giraldi. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but we saw it with this, and we saw that same exact grudge play out again years later when he dropped that diss track called Words to the Bad towards Mike. And everybody was calling him foul for doing that. And I mean, look, being jealous and hating on somebody is never a good look, but I do get it. Because I mean, people try to label jealousy as a feminine trait, but that's just something the system say to protect our egos, because naturally it ain't a gender thing at all. It's a very real, very painful human flaw that we've all felt or struggled with at one point in time. But as men, we're not allowed to show emotions or admit when we're feeling down, because we're taught to mask our insecurities and just swallow our pride. And when you force some men to do that for too long, it's going to mutate into something dark and aggressive, because we see it play out in the world every single day. And though I don't agree with how Jermaine handled it, I do get why he was bitter, because he was supposed to be the front man for the Jackson 5. And he even chose to stay at Motown while his brothers left for Epic Records, because on top of being married to Hazel Gordy, Barry Gordy's daughter, another reason was that he truly believed that he would be the breakout star. So it had to be tough to watch your younger brother become a global icon while your own son is the one playing him in a movie. And that could hurt your pride from a worldly point of view. But see, the one thing Jermaine had to realize, and the thing that a lot of us got to realize too, is that through God, things are supposed to be the way they are. Because I truly believe that God has a plan for each and every one of us individually. And we're only going to get things that are truly meant for us. And it simply wasn't Jermaine's calling to be the front man. It wasn't meant to be. And you got to remember, they both had their own unique gifts. Jermaine was a monster on that bass guitar. He really knew how to lock in a groove. And though Mike was on a whole other level, he wasn't really known for playing instruments like that. It just shows how different their lanes were. And what we got to understand is that staying in your lane and being protected in your lane is the greatest blessing you could ever receive. Because when you look at how both of their lives turned out, Jermaine didn't lose nothing. He dodged a bullet because Mike lived in a cage, but Jermaine was free. He got to live his life and he got to keep his sanity, because that very same spotlight that he spent his whole life chasing and envying was the exact same monster that consumed his brother. And the system will make you think that you're losing just because you ain't the star. But sometimes being left in the shadows is just God keeping you safe from the fire. But look, that doesn't mean that you won't ever face challenges in your own path, because right now, as I stated, Jermaine's staring down at a massive $6.5 million legal judgment from a lawsuit filed by this woman, Rita Barrett, over an alleged sexual assault. Now, I haven't seen any pictures of her. I don't know if she's white or black. Some folks say she's white, but I'm not sure. But the craziest part about this whole thing is that she filed this lawsuit over an alleged sexual assault that happened all the way back in 1988. Now, let's think about that. 1988. I was 4 years old back then. Reagan was leaving the White House. The Cosby Show was #1. And Michael was doing his bad tour. That's how long it's been, folks. And that timeline is exactly where the politics of this law becomes really absurd, to where the legal system basically expects you to be a time traveler. Because how is anyone supposed to dig up alibis or witnesses from decades ago? It just ain't realistic to expect someone to prove where they were or who they were with that long ago. Because by the time it hits that point, the whole process just feels completely broken. But check it out. Earlier this month, I think it was right around June 2nd, Jermaine finally broke his silence and he fired back with some heavy hidden court papers. And let me tell you, he didn't mince any words either. He flat out denied everything. And his stance was basically like, yo, I don't know what the fuck she's talking about. I didn't do this shit. And honestly, that's why he's asking the judge to completely wipe out that default judgment. He wants a fair shot to stand up and fight this case the right way. And check out how wild and crazy his lawyers said this whole setup was. Now, folks were thinking that Jermaine was just ignoring that lawsuit, because it's been said that he didn't respond or whatever. But his lawyers are arguing that he didn't blow it off on purpose, but that this man literally had no clue that it even existed. He was living all the way across the world in Bahrain. So what did Miss Barrett do? Instead of actually tracking him down, they just dropped legal notices in the LA Times using his birth name. Now, a lot of people don't know that legally, he ain't even a Jackson no more, because back in like the late 80s or so, he took the spiritual name Muhammad Abdul Aziz when he converted to Islam. But fast forward to 2013, he went to an LA court to officially change his government name. They said it was for artistic reasons, swapping the old for a U to make his legal name Jermaine Jackson. Now I think about the psychology behind that move, because for 40 years the world was constantly comparing him to Michael. So when he changed his name to Jack S-U-N, you got to wonder, is it really just for artistic reasons like they say, or is this a man who's finally trying to step out of a shadow so big that it basically consumed the whole entire planet? Is he trying to find his own space to shine in his own orbit? It's definitely something to think about. But moving on, his legal team is calling this whole situation exactly what it looks like, a total setup. Because the folks that's suing him, the plaintiff's lawyers, they ran the legal notice in a local LA newspaper using an old, outdated name, knowing damn well a man living in the Middle East with a whole new, completely different legal identity was never going to see that paper in time to defend himself. But the clock is ticking. The judge just locked in the final hearing for June 30th, which is Tuesday. That's the day the court's going to decide whether to throw this whole shady case out the window. And I really do hope they do. And I hope Jermaine wins this one, because he needs to take back his name. Because when this news first broke out a few weeks ago, you had a lot of folks on the internet running wild saying, see, he's guilty. But see, you got to understand how this lady won. She didn't bring or present physical evidence, and she didn't convince a jury. She won by what you call a default judgment. That means that Jermaine simply never showed up to answer the paperwork because he had no idea that it even existed. But a default victory is just a technical win by forfeit. It doesn't prove the truth of what happened over 35, damn near 40 years ago. It just means that the courtroom was empty. But of course, these lazy blogs and gossip channels won't explain that to you because a scandalous headline is what gets more clicks. But I'm going to stand my truth. I don't believe for a second that he's guilty. And look, I know the internet's going to dig up all the old family drama and rumors about who was sleeping with who back in the day, but none of that shit got anything to do with the truth. We're talking about a structural legal shakedown here. And people actually thought that this headline was going to change how everybody was going to view the Michael movie, which I don't think it will because, I mean, what does Shafar and Michael have to do with it? Then some believe this lawsuit was filed because of the new Michael movie. But check the timeline. Rita Barrett filed this claim back in December 2023 when California passed that temporary law, the Sexual Abuse Accountability Act, which had suspended the statute of limitations. And that temporary law was about to end on December 31st, 2023. And Miss Barrett snuck her lawsuit in on December 28th, just 3 days before the door slammed shut forever. And she's even dragging Barry Gordy's name into the paperwork to make it sound big, like some massive Hollywood conspiracy, yet he ain't even a defendant in this case. And look, this wasn't just some sudden rush of healing. All this was just a cold, calculated, last-minute legal maneuver to secure a multi-million-dollar payday. That's all it was. And that's why we got to address the elephant in the room, because when you see a 35-year-old allegation dropping out of nowhere, demanding millions of dollars, you're looking at the exact same playbook that's been used against wealthy, successful black men. Because from the old South all the way to modern Hollywood, weaponizing unproven accusations has always been the fastest way to destroy a black man's name, strip his wealth, and take away his power. Because we've seen this with Bill Cosby, and we've seen this with everybody else. And these women really do need to stop, because common sense tells you that if a serious crime happens, it needs to be reported to the police immediately so a real investigation can take place. Statutes of limitations exist for a reason, to keep things fair. And when they erase those time limits, all they doing is taking away a man's ability to defend himself. Because how do you find alibis, witnesses, or phone records from 1988? You can't. And let's just break down the math to show you how stupid and absurd this is. Now, flip the script and look forward. If a man sexually assaults a woman today in 2026, the law should not allow her to skip the police, wait until the year 2061, and then suddenly show up demanding a multi-million-dollar check. Because by 2061, the majority of us will be old or dead. Your text messages, your bank receipts, and witnesses will be gone or in the graveyard. Because, like I always said, the law is supposed to be protecting the truth by making people bring up accusations right away while things can still be proven. Where the system is creating these loopholes that allow these old unproven stories to turn into multi-million-dollar payouts, it ain't about justice anymore. It just looks like a legal shakedown. Because when you wait decades later to remember a grievance all of a sudden, you ain't fighting for justice. You exploiting a system that puts a permanent target on the back of every black man, regardless if they're famous or not. And that's why we got to demand accountability, and we got to demand real proof, because protecting the legacy means protecting the truth. The law is supposed to be blind, but the people running the system keep their eyes open for a profit. When you mix a broken system with racism and greed, justice goes straight out the window. And you would think the law would be protected, but the system broke it. And honestly, I think it's fucked up. But that's just the cost of being a black man in America, especially when your last name is Jackson. But that's all I want to say, folks. Peace.